Hey, thank you for tuning in to the Starting Small podcast. I'm your host, Cameron Nagel, and I want to say thank you guys so much for the continued support of the podcast. In the past month alone, we have doubled our download numbers, and if you would, at the end of this episode, leave a review on iTunes to push us through the algorithm even more. Thank you guys so much, and enjoy the episode. Hello, and thank you for tuning in to Starting Small, a podcast about brand development, entrepreneurship, and innovation in the modern world. In this episode, I'm joined by Michael Markesbery, CEO and co-founder of OROS Apparel. Obtaining inspiration from a class trip, Michael took the material Aerogel, used in spacesuits, to implement it in his own clothing. Hello, and thank you for tuning in to Starting Small. Today I'm joined by Michael Markesbery of OROS Apparel. Michael, thank you so much for joining me today.
Cameron, thanks for having me.
Of course. So I want to start out with your upbringing. So where did you grow up, and what was your childhood like?
I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio. So I'm a Midwest guy and had a pretty great childhood. I think it's pretty par for the course for a typical Midwest upbringing. I didn't grow up in cornfields or anything like that. I grew up in the suburbs, but I had a pretty what I would consider to be a normal American childhood. Two awesome, incredible, loving parents, and a twin sister and a younger sister, so two sisters and a couple dogs.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Did you have an entrepreneurship mindset growing up? Did you ever sell anything as a kid?
I did.
Yeah.
I would. It's so funny that you ask. I was just going through. I had the fortunate opportunity to spend some time with family during COVID.
Nice.
And so I was home, and we were going through. My mom and I, we were going through old yearbooks, or not yearbooks, but photo albums, and she's going through all these things, and she wants to digitize some of the photos, and make sure that we can keep them and all those things.
Nice.
Anyway, I'm going through the photo books, and there's all these photos of me as a kid, either building something or trying to sell something. And she was telling me oh, it's so prophetic. Look at what you were doing when you were a kid. Look how it compares to what you're doing now. So yes, but it was weird to be able to see it too, and go back to the photo albums and see all those things.
That's amazing. So OROS being based around materials that were used in space, did you ever have a fascination with space as a kid as well too?
I did. I mean, every kid when they grow up, you
Of course.
want to be a doctor, a firefighter, or an astronaut. Those are, so yeah, absolutely. And I remember being fascinated with the idea of space, and that all really kind of matriculated itself as well later on in life. When in college, I ended up getting this scholarship created by the Mercury 7 astronauts called the Astronaut Scholarship, and that's I'm sure we'll get to it later, but that's really what spurred OROS and all the things. So yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And then in 2011, you went on to study at Miami of Ohio. What did you study there?
So I was pre-med.
Okay.
I was meant to be a doctor. That's what I thought I was going to do. And when you're pre-med to get into med school, you've got to join a research lab and get publications on whatever you're working on, and that's what I did. And I got really lucky, and through those publications. In the lab that we were working in, I ended up getting that, as we mentioned, that scholarship created by the Mercury 7 astronauts called the Astronaut Scholarship. And through that Astronaut Scholarship, that's how I learned about this NASA tech called Aerogel. NASA said that Aerogel was the lowest thermal conductive solid in existence.
Wow.
A bunch of fancy words, meaning that it was, best insulation in the universe, so good. NASA was using this stuff to insulate things in space, and so I'm thinking hey, space is negative 455 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah.
It is the coldest temperature in the universe. And y'all are telling me that you're taking this aerogel stuff and using it to insulate things in space? Like, this should be in every single jacket in the world.
Yeah.
Because a couple months prior to that, while in college, like my sophomore year, I went backpacking across Europe and ended up climbing the tallest mountain in the Northeast Swiss Alps.
Wow.
And, phenomenal experience. But like, I vividly remember looking and feeling like the Michelin Man, like just tons of
Yeah.
bulk and tons of layers. And so I like at the time, like I remember being on top of that mountain and thinking like, this makes absolutely no sense. Like I, Cameron, I'm sure you can tell I'm a science geek, and
Yeah.
I, to me, it seems like there's been all this innovation in the world, and like the world's only evolving at faster and faster speeds.
For sure.
And it was just kind of uncanny to me that we were, in my mind, still doing the same thing with outerwear. We were, we were just using animal byproducts like goose down to insulate jackets. The same thing we've been doing for hundreds to thousands of years. And so it didn't make sense to me that like there's been all this innovation and outerwear has not evolved. Like there's just like, in my mind, there had to be a better way to cut the bulk, cut the layers, and still stay warm. And so when I, came back to the US and learned about aerogel, it was like, okay, ding, ding, ding. Like this has gotta be it.
Yeah.
And so I remember like one of my best friends at the time, and still one of my best friends now, co-founder and CEO of OROS, was a guy named Ritvik Venna. And we met in organic chemistry. And I remember we were in the main library on Miami's campus and studying for an OChem exam. And like, it's like a couple hours till the exam. And like, I pitched him this idea, like, hey, what if we took this NASA space shuttle insulation and just put it into apparel so you could have really thin gear that keeps you warm? It's being cold. I'm like, well, same here. And that, we kind of united us on this process, and we ended up taking the 10 grand from that Astronaut Scholarship and putting it into working with Aerogel. And we learned very quickly why this incredible material wasn't being used, ubiquitously. Like it was kind of weird that it was the best insulation in the universe. And by the way, been around since 1931. Like it's not new. It's been around for decades. And so it's like, how come this material isn't ubiquitously used in like every single insulation platform in the world? Well, we found out super quick. Like we got our first sample, and I remember holding it and it just shattering in my hand. And so it turned out that this aerogel stuff was super brittle, right? Like you could poke it and it would just shatter. And so it became really clear to us, like, okay, that's why this stuff can't be used in apparel. Like, you need flexibility and durability in your apparel, pretty much like almost any other insulation application.
Yeah.
And so our passion project for like our last 2 years of college, after we got our hands on our first pieces of aerogel, became just trying to figure out how to take this incredible insulation and just make it flexible and durable enough for applications like apparel.
Yeah.
And by our senior years of college, blew through the 10 grand. Like this became our passion. This was our nights. This was our weekends. Like this was everything. But by our senior years of college, we ended up creating the first ever flexible, durable aerogel composite in the world.
Wow.
And that's what's called SOLARCORE. And that's what's in all of our gear today.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So, yeah, continue.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So SOLARCORE's got two big benefits over every other insulation in the world. The first is just warmth. our first hire out of college was a guy by the name of Jeff Nash. Today, Jeff is our chief technology officer and our VP of product. But
Okay.
prior to OROS, Jeff ran the innovation and materials teams at the North Face for like
Wow.
7 years. And, if you can imagine, like, here are two kids that just graduated college and are pitching this guy on the warmest insulation in the world. And he was pretty skeptical. And so we finally convinced him to just like test it. Like we said, hey, like just test it. And so he says, okay, fine. And so he started on a contract basis. And the first thing he did was he just tested SOLARCORE, tested it against like every installation that he had in his, I don't know if Rolodex is the right word, but you get the idea. All the installations that he had. And came back like 2 months later or something like that and says, hey, so I've tested SOLARCORE against over 250 installations, like, and I haven't found anything warmer yet. And I'm like, that's exactly what I'm trying to tell you. So number one is it's just warmer than everything else out there, which is great. But what makes Aerogel and thereby SOLARCORE special is that every insulation that's ever existed has needed bulk to work.
Yeah.
Like goose down. Like the way goose down works is goose down traps air. And the more air goose down traps, the more insulation it's going to give you. The problem is air takes volume or space. So the more air you funnel in there, the puffier and puffier your jacket gets. And that's why goose down jackets generally look really puffy, is they've got all this airspace, and it's that airspace that keeps you warm. The problem is if you compress the jacket, thereby getting rid of the bulk, you lose all the airspace and thereby lose all the insulation. Meaning that since the beginning of time, there's been this dependency on volume, bulk, airspace, industry calls it loft, LOFT, to keep you warm.
Yeah.
That is not true with Aerogel or SOLARCORE. SOLARCORE under compression, 15 psi, a good amount of pressure, maintains 97% of its thermal performance. Point being, for the first in history, you can have a thin amount of insulation, put it into a garment, and still stay warm. Said another way, for the first time in history, you don't have to look like the Michelin Man to stay warm. And that's really the big difference with SOLARCORE and what got us really excited. And I kid you not, just last week got a call from our patent attorneys, and he let us know that the first 2 patents we filed in college on SOLARCORE, like right when we graduated, were just allowed by the U.S. Patent Office. So that was nice. That was some pretty cool news.
Yeah.
But at that point, like, now we have this pretty amazing insulation technology inspired by NASA. And like our next question was like, will anyone want to, buy it? And so we ended up making a prototype jacket our senior years of college out of this SOLARCORE stuff. And it was a pretty ugly looking jacket. This was before we hired Jeff, and it was designed by 2 kids in a college dorm room that knew nothing about apparel. And we took that jacket. Are you familiar with Kickstarter?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, cool. So we launched our first jacket on Kickstarter because we didn't have the money to. There's these things with factories called MOQs, or minimum order quantities, where like you've got to order a certain amount of inventory for them to even be willing to go into production, and we didn't have money to meet those MOQs, so we needed a way to get the money to meet the MOQs. And so we thought, well, what's a better way than Kickstarter? Also gets us validation and all those things. So launched a Kickstarter campaign with a goal of $100,000. And for Rhythmy, this was also our deciding factor between OROS and med school. Hit the $100,000, tried the whole OROS thing, plan B, med school. And I remember like in the first 36 hours after launching the campaign, we hit like 120 something grand, like
Wow.
more money than two kids from the Midwest have ever seen before in our lives. Closed the Kickstarter campaign at 320 grand, which, was incredible to us. And
Yeah.
um, that was really the start of OROS, as we were graduating college, back in May of 2015. So it's been, it's been 5 years now, and so much has happened.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and we can
So,
talk
how
about
did you obtain those numbers on Kickstarter? Were you advertising Oros for a while by this time, or because that's a pretty crazy number for just
Yeah.
just a couple days?
You know, we 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 didn't have Facebook or Instagram following.
Okay.
So think this is like, we had the product. We didn't
Yeah.
I don't even think we had a website at this point. Like, we literally just created the product, and we needed a way to get the initial traction and validation.
Yeah.
And we didn't have money. That was the other thing. We didn't have money.
Mhm.
So we didn't have a website. We didn't do ads on Kickstarter. Now my opinion on ads on Kickstarter have changed, and we can talk about that if you're interested, in terms of
Mhm.
like whether or not you should do it. I think now the risk reward is now worth it compared to 5 years ago. But
Yeah.
we didn't do ads, didn't have Instagram, didn't have like a Facebook following, and so candidly, the thing that drove everything
Mhm.
was PR. That's how we got awareness.
Yeah.
Uh,
Okay.
and there's a really great article by Tim Ferriss called "How to Raise $100,000 in 10 Days,"
Mm.
and the article covers line by line exactly the steps that Rith and I followed as we built our Kickstarter campaign. And candidly, I don't think we would have been anywhere near as successful without that insight and advice. It is truly phenomenal,
Yeah.
especially how they think about generating PR. That got us on the cover of CNET the same day that I think the Apple Watch launched. Now, Apple Watch had a
Wow.
really big tile on the
Yeah.
homepage, and here we are, like a really small corner in the bottom right. But point is,
It's still big. Yeah.
yeah, you know, that article has some really great insight for any person that's looking to generate awareness for their company, especially if the route is crowdfunding like Kickstarter, but just generically as well. Really phenomenal insight from that article.
For sure. So once you raised this initial capital, was this pretty much utilized towards production of the singular jacket? You had no other products at this time, correct?
Correct. So just singular jacket. Uh, the warehouse was my parents' garage.
Nice.
Uh, Ruth and I didn't take a salary at this point.
Mhm.
Literally every dollar went towards buying inventory. At that point we also had put money aside to web dev for a site so that we could start selling online and all those things. But yeah, the bulk majority of costs was buying inventory, and more inventory than we needed so that we could start selling it on our newly built ecom platform.
Nice. Okay, so once you had the product established, how did you guys begin to advertise at this time then?
Um, so, up until the end of 2019, all of our sales have been 100% direct to consumer via our ecom platform, meaning via our
Mhm.
website. And the biggest way that we advertise, just like every other digitally native brand, is online ads. And there's only so many platforms. There's Facebook and there's Google. Now there's TikTok. Who knows what's going to happen with TikTok?
Yeah.
But there's TikTok, and there's some other outlets like Snapchat now you can advertise on, and yada yada.
Mhm.
But ubiquitously, I believe I would agree that the most efficient ad spend you're generally going to find on Facebook.
Yeah.
And then the question is, how do you advertise in such a way that it's efficient advertising, meaning that your cost per click or CPCs are super low, meaning that,
Mm-hmm.
you know, the amount of money that you have to spend to drive someone to your site is super low.
Yeah.
And then how do you make sure that your conversion rate on your site, meaning how, let's say per every 100 people, how many people converted by your product, is super high. You got to identify the metrics that you care about, and then candidly, I think from that point, it's uh, e- every ad is a science experiment
Yeah, for
where,
sure.
yeah, like you've got your hypothesis. Like my hypothesis is that ad A will work better than ad B, and then you test it. You have your control variable, like your variable is ad A, your control is ad B. You run them, you test them, you learn from it. Either your hypothesis was right or wrong, and then you repeat the test until you continually get the best metrics possible. And I think within that, there's a lot of interesting, like, um, unique ways of getting in front of people,
Mm-hmm.
in unique ways of advertising that candidly will still stand out against the competition. Like one of our ways early on that we used is like we needed a way to show like how well the jackets worked, and so
Mm-hmm.
we got our hands on the coldest substance we could get our hands on, which is liquid nitrogen. And liquid nitrogen is negative 321 degrees Fahrenheit,
Mm-hmm.
and put one of our teammates in the jacket, and thermal sensors on either side, and sprayed them with liquid nitrogen. And the outside of the jacket, I think, was like negative 200 degrees Fahrenheit,
Wow.
and then the inside was 89 degrees Fahrenheit, basically
That's
unchanged.
wild.
And showing that visually was a really compelling way of expressing not only the value proposition of the jacket and the value proposition of the tech, but really did an awesome job of generating incredibly low CPCs to get people to the site, as well as PR. And so, you
Yeah.
know, I think within those ads, understanding what remember that you're expressing benefits over features,
Mm-hmm.
and trying to do so in a creative way to reach your consumers is really important.
For sure. So, what would you say is your main demographic then?
Historically, our target consumer, and who's made up of a majority of our purchases last year, as well as years prior, is who we call the modern urbanite.
Okay.
This is a late 20 to early 30-year-old
Mhm.
that lives in an urban environment. If you were to take a look at the U.S., a geographic map of the U.S., and look at the disbursement of sales of OROS products across the U.S., you'd see that number one on a volume perspective is New York.
Yeah.
You'd see that number one on a per capita perspective is Chicago. Chicago's number two from a volume perspective. After that comes Boston, and then you go to the West Coast, you go to San Francisco, and then you go up to Seattle, and then ironically down to LA, and then it keeps going. The point is, our target consumer lives in an urban environment,
Hmm.
very different than the consumer that lives in like a park city per se.
For
Uh,
sure.
and decent split in this target consumer base between male and female. It's about a 50-50 split. It might actually lean slightly more female. It might be like 52-48 favoring female.
Okay.
And the most important thing is, yes, they live in an urban environment, but they like to spend their weekends outside, doing a
Hmm.
variety of activities, whether that is exploring the outdoors or getting outside to just go on an urban run, whatever that is. That's one of the most important features of our target consumer, and who's made up a majority of our purchases historically. Now, what's interesting though is our second largest consumer, our secondary consumer, who has significantly uh, has pretty low CPAs or cost per acquisition, is
Hmm.
who we call the warmth seeker. They are a late 40, early 50-year-old. Again, live in this urban environment. But the most important thing to them is they just want to stay warm while they walk their dog on a cold Chicago winter day.
Yeah.
And so that makes up our secondary purchaser and our second largest consumer historically.
Gotcha. So have you guys ever looked into getting into retail at all with the products?
So Q1 2020, we launched OROS's first ever pop-up.
Wow, nice.
And our goal was to break even. We didn't care about making money. Like candidly, like the only reason that you do pop-ups is brand awareness. Yes, you get revenue along the way, but the goal should be for your own pop-ups really to drive awareness and then just not lose money along the way.
Yeah.
And so that was our goal. And even with COVID, we ended up being incredibly successful, which is great. And our biggest learning lesson from that first pop-up was the value of in-store activations. What I mean by that is like right after we opened the store, we had a launch. We had several launch parties, but one of our launch parties, we flew in the most famous astronaut to ever come from Chicago, where we opened up the store.
Wow.
And his name's Scooter Altman, and Scooter, last man to see Hubble telescope with his own eyes, in the U.S. Astronaut Hall of Fame. If you've ever seen Top Gun, he's the fighter pilot that rang the bell tower.
Oh, wow.
Jet. So he's super cool guy,
Yeah.
and had him. He spent an hour in the store with doing an Ask an Astronaut series, where he spent his first half an hour talking about how he found his beyond in space, and the last half an hour just taking questions from the crowd. Like anything from, "Hey, do you actually pee in your spacesuit when you're on a spacewalk?" to whatever you can imagine.
Yeah.
And what was super cool is, like the store capacity. This was pre-COVID, by the way, but the store capacity was 48, and we had over I don't know, like 100 something people in the store in like that hour period, and it was one of our highest revenue days, one of our highest profitability days, and all the days that were our highest revenue and highest profitability were the days that we did these activations. Point being, the biggest learning lesson is we believe for our pop-ups to be successful, at least in the near term, they need to involve a good amount of these in-store activations that also benefit us in the sense of awareness, community building, and all these other things.
For sure.
So that was our first delve into pop-ups. I'm still bullish. I still believe that omnichannel is going to be the way of the future for any digitally native brand.
Completely agree.
But I think COVID is slowing down that manifestation to a degree. But yeah, I totally think that it sounds like you and I are on the same page. Omnichannel is I believe a necessary route forward for almost every digitally native brand.
For sure. So you had this astronaut come and visit. What did he have to say about your product? Or have any other astronauts seen this? Are they very impressed, and have they seen anything like this?
I'll let you in on a secret. We haven't
Okay.
released it yet, and so
Oh, wow.
I think the first to know. But October 1st is NASA's birthday, and NASA was founded October 1st, 1958, and on October 1st, OROS is dropping a NASA OROS product collab.
Wow.
It'll be 400 units of a jacket that is incredibly designed, takes after the spacesuits in terms of ergonomics and all those things, and has NASA branding all over it. But the coolest thing is every single one of those 400 units will be signed by an astronaut in the U.S. Astronaut Hall of Fame.
Wow.
The woman signing the jacket is a woman by the name of Kathy Sullivan. Kathy's the first woman to ever go on a spacewalk, the first woman to go to the deepest part of the ocean,
Man.
calls herself the most vertical person in the world, which is a
Mhm.
really cool title.
Yeah.
In the U.S. Astronaut Hall of Fame, she lives and breathes OROS's ethos of find your beyond. Uh,
Wow.
and super excited to have her. So your question was if other astronauts seen your products.
Hmm.
Yes.
That's amazing. So, looking at Oros today, I looked at the website. You guys offer more than jackets. So, what products do you offer at this time?
We offer a pretty wide variety. You know, within jackets, our best seller is the Orion Parka. That's what Forbes
Mm,
called the warmest jacket in the world,
wow.
because it is. But it's the jacket is a tank. If you want to stay
Yeah.
warm, like that's the jacket for you. But our fastest growing category these past couple of years have been our performance wear category,
Mm,
which are things like our insulated leggings,
hmm.
our insulated quarter zip. Our quarter zip was named Runners World Gear of the Year. A really great base layer for like running.
Hmm.
Uh, and products like this, like it's these closer to body performance wear pieces that has been our fastest growing category in the business. Uh,
Hmm.
Outside of that, we offer accessories like um, mittens and gloves and beanies, all insulated with our SOLARCORE tech as well. And so I would say those are our three buckets of categories. You have our outerwear, like our jackets, like our Orion parkas. You've got our performance wear, like our leggings and quarter zips. And then you've got our accessories, like our gloves and beanies.
Awesome. So, if you could share one piece of advice with an aspiring entrepreneur, maybe something you learned or regret, just anything, what would that be?
I would say that, you know, uh, one of Oros's internal mottos
Hmm.
is science the shit out of everything you do.
Yeah.
And what that means to me is there's this kind of weird viewpoint from society um, on success and failure,
Hmm.
where like uh, if success is an iceberg, everyone sees like what's above the water. They see the success, but they don't always see like the amount of failures that have gone into reaching that success. And um, I believe we as people look at failure and think that it's a really negative thing.
Yeah.
I think sometimes it really can be.
Hmm.
There's times you can't afford to fail, right?
For sure.
Uh, but I believe that overarching uh, failure is part of the process to reach success.
Hmm.
What I mean by that is going back to, how I believe scientists view the world from this perspective of everything you do is a science experiment where
Hmm.
you have a hypothesis, and you test your hypothesis.
Yeah.
Uh, for OROS that can be ads, for OROS that can be product creation, for OROS that can be R&D on our future tech.
Hmm.
It can be biz dev, whatever you want it to be. But all these things have hypotheses. This is what we believe we can achieve. Let's test it. Let's see, what will help get us there, what won't, yada yada. And when something fails, when you run an ad and it doesn't work, that's obviously on a smaller scale of failure. But a lot of people get kind of downtrodden over that. Like they think like, oh no, like this isn't working, and they get upset with themselves. But like, I think the most successful people view that quote unquote failure as a part of the overall science experiment. And it's a learning process where you can take that data and now replug it back into your hypothesis, adjust your hypothesis accordingly, and learn from it.
Hmm.
And so I think some of the greatest successes come from the worst failures. And I think if you can view these things as a science experiment and the associated learnings appropriately, I think it'll really benefit you in the long term. So that's probably one piece of advice that I would have.
For sure. Well, Michael, thank you so much for joining me today. And to the listeners out there, make sure to check out OROS at orosapparel.com.
Great. Thanks, Cameron.
Hey, thank you for listening to this episode of Starting Small. If you would, leave a review on whatever platform you're listening on. Also, follow Starting Small Pod on social platforms to keep up to date on future guests.